me to the moon and let me play among the stars. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. So that is what they tell you in Hollywood. So in reality, the moon is something like this. It's a dark place, it's cold, you can't breathe. There are a lot of problems there, right? There's no gravity, I don't feel myself. So essentially what is happening is, it's not my comfort zone. You're not on Earth. Earth is very comfortable, it's green, it's vibrant, I see a lot of people. There's nothing there. It's not my comfort zone. And I think the same goes for creativity. So what essentially happens is, when we look at creativity, a lot of people say, okay, creativity is, ek achhi drawing bana di, acha gana bana diya, or maybe something else. But the thing is, creativity is very hard. It's only when you get into your dark circles, or if you get into your darker zones, get out of your comfort zones, that's when you realize creativity is going to happen. So how does that happen, and why does it not happen? So why do you think the people are not creative? Why aren't we very creative? So essentially everybody says, hey, I'm not creative. Me being an innovator, no way. So what's the difference? Why does it happen so? So most of our brains, this is brain 101. So they have the left hemisphere, right hemisphere. I'll not get into the specifics, but the left hemisphere essentially is responsible for logic reasoning. And that is what is converging your thoughts. And why does convergence essentially happens? Because you have been gone through an education system, you have your environment, you have your learning, accident ho gaya, so drive slow. So there is a constant cognitive learning that's happening in your brain, and that's operated by a left hemisphere. And because of that, man is used to converging the thoughts, simplifying the problems by what he has already learned. So when I see a problem in my organization, I know how to solve it. When I see somebody on the road, I know how to solve it. When I see my wife screaming, I know how to solve it. So there's a lot of learning that is going on in my head, and that's all converging the thoughts. But what we want to do is be childlike again, be divergent in our thoughts. So when we go divergent, ever wondered a child, he's going to look at the road, ye road kali kyun hai? Why is the corner? And me or my father would say, because it's X, Y, Z, there's a coordinate, that's why it's a corner. But essentially, when you look at a child, it has no learning. It has no experiential, external learning from the school, from somewhere else, when it's really an infant. So what happens is he questions everything. He questions, why is the corner a corner? And then you wonder, why isn't it round? And then your logical reasoning is saying, because a corner is corner. But the question is, why isn't a corner round, right? So what happens here is, when you are a baby, when you're growing up, you're fed with so much of external education, external environment, learning on a day-to-day basis, that if you do something wrong, you're going to get scolded. If you do something right, you're going to get rewarded. So there's a constant incentivization reward system that goes in this, in the environment. And because of which, you stop thinking intuitively and stop questioning what's happening with the environment. You stop questioning everything that is happening in your organization. You stop questioning about your own self. Why am I like this? Main kaun hu? Aham brahmasmi. We stop questioning all of that. Why do you say, main samay hu? Why? Why do they say, okay, there's a big cosmic energy lying out there. Why is this happening? Why is that happening? We stop questioning everything, right? So that is when you stop getting into your uncomfortable zones, and you're always in that shell. Think out of the box. Innovation, a CEO will say, think out of the box. But what is the box? The box is you. So when you have to think outside the box, you have to drive your right hemisphere. And how does that happen? That happens with your captain. So I am going to be your captain on this journey, and I want you to be a part of this journey where we try to think creatively, we try to think innovatively, and try to understand what innovation is essentially. Innovation can be disruptive, can be incremental as well. If you have your business today, not everything has to be an inventor. Not everybody has to be an Einstein. There is enough done. The wheel has been invented. Maybe get a better tire grip on it, right? So incremental innovations are equally important as disruptive innovations. Now what happens is, so I represent a company called battleinfinity.io as the Chief Design Officer and the Chief Communication Officer. It's a crypto-based company, so anybody who's interested in crypto can talk to me later on, right? So we'll try to get on this rocket ship called design thinking. Why did I take this experience, or why am I trying to bring this metaphor or analogy is, because you're trying to go to the moon, and moon is our uncomfortable place. And that can only happen when you have a good rocket ship. Now this rocket ship, before we get into the specifics of what design thinking is, the 5 charts or whatever, the more the data and the technical know-how of design thinking, I'll just ask you a simple question. A lot of you must have heard of these 3 words casually used in your organizations. Design sprint, design thinking, design process. But what is all of it, right? Now let me ask you a simpler question. What's pizza? What's a cupcake? And what's a soda? So if you look at it on a deeper level, what it really means is sugar is sweet and so is design, right? At the end of the day, a body just understands that it's sugar, it raises your insulin level. So it's the same thing, but packaged for different hunger needs, right? So that's how simple it is. So when you look at design sprints, it's more feature focused, specifically for say a UI application, or maybe there is a feature that needs to be launched. Design thinking is a mindset. I think Jimmy also keeps mentioning and stressing about it, that it's a mindset. And that mindset, how does it flow across into the entirety of the process, is the design process, right? So for a car company, the design process might be as long as 4 years. Or for a smaller company, trying to get an MVP out, it might be as small as 3 months. So it totally depends on you, case to case, on what kind of product you're trying to develop and what kind of a process are you going to follow. Now we have the space rocket. We are all astronauts. I'm your captain. But what's our mission? Our mission is innovation. And when we look at mission innovation, we have to try to lead everyone to think creative and think innovatively. A very easier said than done task, right? Everybody talks about innovation, but nobody actually gets there. So now let's understand this rocket ship better. There are 5 boosters to it, and every booster has its own importance. The first booster being empathize, as Som had already mentioned about it and stressed about it, empathy, even Jimmy also stressed about it. The second one being define, the third one called ideate, fourth, create, and the last one, test. So the fonts are off, but it's okay. Now, when we look at, we'll just get started with what the process is and what happens at each of these boosters so that you understand the spaceship better. When you're trying to fly, you know your rocket ship and you know your boosters and you can get to your destination. So when we look at empathy, there are different ways of looking at empathy. A lot of people say this guy has some problem, that's sympathy. But then there is another way to look at it, my user. This user term is very powerfully used in organizations, right? User, who's my user? Who's my user? And when this user word comes in, nobody's actually empathizing with the user. You're just using it on your slides that, okay, there's a user, that we know what he needs, we know what he doesn't need. But when you look at empathy from a different experiential lens, what happens is you are trying to be in that person's shoes. So try to be an Uber driver for a week, for a month, for maybe a year, if you can, if you really have that. In India, when I was working for an electrical company, a global electrical giant, we used to make these switches for villas and bungalows and 5-star hotels. But in India, nobody thought about the electrician side of the story. There is a way to think about it. They used to keep a 5 rupee note in the box and they would say, ye bik jayega. That's another marketing way of understanding the user. But when we look at user, there are 2 users here. One is definitely the guy who presses the switch. But then what about the installer? What about the electrician? So there are different levels of users that you have when you look at an entire product cycle. And that's when you have to understand a product from its own complete life cycle and totality to be able to design better product experiences. And that's where empathy is very important. So we tried to run a small experience where we became an electrician for a month. Ever try to fix a ceiling fan by yourself? I've done that. Very difficult. Got electrocuted as well. So, but that helps you understand what empathy is, what pains that these members actually go through, and then you are able to design better experiences, better products. So a very good example, when I was the head of Hero Cycles, the creative director. Now, what happens here is, earlier times, all of you must have seen that there were bicycles that were metal, very heavy, with a carrier, metal cage, and metal basket. And these bicycles were for 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, right? But then what happened? Organizations always looked at the consumer side. The consumer and the user, they were not really able to differentiate. They were not able to empathize on what the baby or the 2-year-old or the toddler is experiencing, right? So imagine that little muscle pulling such heavy bike, right? But then what happened? India had had another mindset, again from sales and marketing, itne mein itna chahiye, right? So because of that, what happened was our kids were being tortured by such bicycles, which are very heavy. And nobody understood the quality of the grips, quality of the pedals, quality of the saddle, because the saddle is plastic again. Everything on the bicycle, every touch point of the bicycle was hard. And then came some international companies who thought design thinking, who thought about the user, who thought about the consumer, the end user finally. So here they started designing bicycles without the carrier, without the basket, and better saddles, better pedals, lightweight bicycles, sold at a higher price, and they were all successful. We all know how Firefox came in. We all know how Decathlon came in. So once that happened, all the Indian companies started changing that mindset. We need to look at a final user. Because every bicycle, everybody started, comparing with their own friends, with their own peers. Yeah, tere paas halka wala hai kya? Mere paas bhi halka hai. So it all started like that. Tere paas gear hai kya? Earlier, all the bicycles were non-geared. And because of which, what was happening was we were not able to understand who our final user is. So we have to look at the consumer story as well. And more importantly, look at the user story. So when I was doing an exhibition for Pepsi, the consumer goes at different levels. There is the wholesaler, there is the retailer, and then there is probably the final consumer or the final user who takes the sip, right? But then what about the retailer? What are his pain points? What about the wholesaler? What are his pain points? So when you do that, you are able to rephrase and define your problem in a better way. So when you look at, say, a bicycle, a typical marketing or a sales presentation or a requirement would be, we need a new bicycle, market is going down, but then when you look at it from a designer's lens, it's about creating a product with better riding experience. When you look at those words allow you or force you to think about the touch points, right? How the person interacts with the bicycle, how he sits, what happens. So all of that is on the emotional side of the experience. Now, when we take ideate, so this is where we take off. So this is our third booster of our spaceship. Now, when we look at the third booster, we have to look at stupid ideas. You have to be stupid when you have to innovate. If you're not stupid, you're not innovating. Simple as that. A lot of you already might be questioning, why is he so animated? Why is he, behaving like this during his presentation? But the thing is that the moment you take off, you don't question anything. That is very, very, very critical during a design thinking experience or a workshop. So what it essentially says is, when you're trying to ideate, if I have to look at a problem, like who will prepare my food, I can be as stupid as saying my dog can prepare a food. I don't look at whether it's feasible, not feasible, how many problems are there, who's gonna do it, kutta thodi karega. All of those things that come into our mind. So we stop all of those thoughts for a moment, because what is happening? You're again allowing your convergent brain coming in and put logical reasoning there. So don't have that at all. Even when you have to laugh about some ideas, you can do that. That's absolutely fine. But at the same time, you have to encourage weird ideas to pop up. Long back somebody said that there's going to be a touch something. People are going to be able to zoom like that and zoom out like that. People are like, pagal hai kya? What are you talking about? Right? But then that became a reality. And same way, a lot of people said about delivery. Can somebody else do my food delivery? So now people are looking at drone options. So during ideation, you have to let your ideas go wild. There are going to be setbacks because of your conditioning. You're not going to be able to go beyond your convergent thinking. But it's very, very important that you push yourself and go to your divergent brain and try to look at ideas that are weird, stupid, crazy, undoable, not possible, all of those words that come into your mind. Try looking at it from a different perspective. Let's try it out. Let's work it out. Let's prototype it. Let's build it out. So that's the next space rocket booster that we have. So when you're looking at build, use whatever tools you have. So a design thinking workshop typically will have a lot of smaller materials to work with. You might have clay, you might have sheets of paper, post-its, and all of that. That's great. But if you have the facility of a 3D printer, please go ahead and do that. So don't let a design thinking workshop just be a 5-day exercise. Rather, it becomes a mindset, and you start implementing various kinds of prototypes, and then you start understanding, okay, how the user is interacting with your product, what's the scale of it, how the banking, how the banking product is doing well in the market or not. So small things, and this is a very quick exercise, it's not a very long exercise. So what you have to do is you have to build a prototype, take it to various users and say, bhai sahab, ye chalega kya? Is it going to work? Is it not going to work? See how they're interacting with it. Even if it is a UI experience, just understand how they're trying to operate the prototypes. And that is an iterative process. So the first time it doesn't work, you go back to ideation again. The second time it doesn't work, you go back to ideation again. So this design thinking is not a 5-day exercise or a 2-week exercise. It keeps on going in an organization till you find the right mix of what you intended with and how you started out. Now, I have told you about our destination innovation, I being your astronaut captain, and I've spoken about the space rocket. Now, if you still don't understand the space rocket, there's always the flight manual. You go to Google, type design thinking, you get 2 double triangles, converging, diverging, diverging, converging. So that will also help you understand what design thinking is. So why I'm telling about these points are because a lot of times when we look at design thinking from business perspective, we do attend a lot of great workshops, but we are not finally able to implement them. Now, when we look at various businesses and try to understand how design thinking can be relevant to my industry and what can I do in bringing those kinds of changes. When we look at manufacturing, I'm just going to take some examples that essentially help you think more laterally, so it's not a straightforward question. Manufacturing could be, let's build the next way of non-motorized transport. I'm not saying bicycle, I'm not saying scooters, non-motorized transport for kids, the next level. But then you have to put a because line there, which gives you the insight, right? So the insight being the attention span being low, we might just make things very joyful. I'm not being indicative of any product here, right? Same way for technology. Now, ma'am was talking about the virtual spaces. I come from a metaverse industry, and everybody's talking about metaverse, and something's going to happen in the virtual world. But that's taking us away from the real world, more and more away. Now, let's think, how can we bring in the real world into the virtual world? Can we add in some sensorial experiences or maybe something else, So, and because technology is definitely taking us away. Even in the banking sector, the world is digitizing. You have a lot of digitization of products that are happening. But when we look at the weaker sections who are daily wage workers, how do you connect them to the banking services or the banking models? So that's when you start thinking fresh, start thinking new ideas. Food. I was working for a shawarma company. I was helping them with the design thinking exercise. And now the question was, they said, shawarma this, shawarma this, shawarma that. Now let's do a small exercise. Everybody closes their eyes and does not think about a pink elephant. Very stupid exercise, very small exercise. But what happens? That trigger word pink elephant, your convergent brain kicks in, pink elephant, right? So the moment they say shawarma, what happens? You think of a roll, chicken, wrapped in, and it's gone. But when you think of a new non-veg style or a different way of looking at food, you come out with so many innovative ideas where you start building different things. Medical industry. A lot of people say, okay, medical industry is white, scary, and very, very intimidating to children as well, right? But because of design thinking, there are a lot of companies who have now started gamifying the entire CT scan experience. So it's like getting into a tunnel, you're playing in the aquarium. So a lot of kids, they don't get intimidated and don't find it very scary to enter into a CT scan. Otherwise, they would cry, they would tussle around, and the scan won't be the best. So now what they do is they try to gamify the entire process. As the child enters the CT scan room, you tell the child, okay, abhi aapko ye karna hai. There's an entire game that's built around, and the experience is much better. So now the question is, the space rocket, the boosters, the operational manual, but can I fly? Now every CEO is out there going to ask you, am I also going to be able to fly this? Well, it is a lonely planet, okay? Now what happens is you might do great workshops, but then leaders lose focus and track after a workshop. They forget what was actually done there, the first and the last line theory, plus at the same time how to drive the entire exercise within their own team. And design thinking becomes a fancy activity a lot of times. It becomes like an L&D HR activity members do for a year. And I think the first speaker already spoke about if the employee is not motivated enough or driven by the goals of the company, he's only going to look at his paycheck. And you're going to force a design thinking workshop on him. So it's going to be very difficult. It's going to be, chalo, theek hai, fun time. You do it once, you do it twice, you do it thrice. He's like, post-its again. I don't want post-its anymore. So how do you change that? How do you break that? And then it can't be by force as well. Because Som was earlier in HR, L&D HR, and then he says, you have to do design thinking. So that's another way where a lot of companies are getting it wrong. So we can't do that. So what is the way, and how do you, and definitely not hiring expensive workshop companies. So a lot of companies, they are expert in design thinking. Nothing against them. I do that myself. I do host design thinking workshops for companies, try to educate a lot of people about it. But then what happens is a lot of companies pay a lot of money and then completely forget about it. So that's not what design thinking is. Design thinking is a mindset, and you take it to a longer journey. So, but then there are fixes. You have to implement design thinking in smaller teams. When we look at smaller teams, either you can make core innovation teams in your companies. You give them that environment, where they're not strict about timelines, they're not very stringent about their pay scales and what's going to happen if this doesn't work, what's going to happen if this R&D fails. But you definitely allow them to be the pilots of that ship, right? So what happens is when you have the small team, a lot of your other teams in the organization can hire this team. Whenever they want to reach their destination innovation, they take this team. So they don't really have to go through the entire design thinking workshop, A, B, C, D, E. They just hire this core team within their organization and understand that they can reach them. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is executing a bottom-up strategy rather than a top-down strategy. So a lot of CEOs, a lot of general managers might learn what design thinking is, but if it doesn't go to the final person in their org chart, it's of no use. So it has to be a bottom-up strategy. If you can find core teams or smaller teams and help them get success, immediate success. Don't put them on larger problems, like next year we want to launch a car, so can you be innovative about it? So that's huge, that's very huge. Probably it could be as simple as, hey, we want to launch a small feature on our UI. Can you be innovative about it? So what happens is when smaller teams are able to apply design thinking on a smaller equation, and when they see that earlier success, that spreads out like a virus. And that is very, very critical for organizations to do so that you have a mindset change. Once you reward them, once they are famous within the organization that, hey, they ran design thinking and they were able to achieve this, which is not easily possible for our organization, and that's the entire virus becomes viral. Now, embracing Jugaad. Now, a lot of people, when I speak about Jugaad, or when India speaks about Jugaad, Jugaad has, somehow become a very dark side to it, right? Everybody says, yeah, Jugaadu aadmi hai, yeah, Jugaad is this, Jugaad is that. But when you look at it from a designer's perspective, don't look at it from your convergent brain. Look at it from your diverging brain. When you look at it from a diverging brain, there is a problem, right? There is a problem, there is a user, and this is just a quick prototype. Think of it this way. There's a design thinking implemented. This is a quick prototype. How you take that prototype, better it out, iterate it out, and make a better product out of it, it's your take. So when you go back, when you see somebody who's done a good jugaad, probably you can nurture him, hire him, or even do it yourself. Everybody's a competition these days, so it's okay. But at least you can understand what's happening when you look at jugaad. So there was a problem, there was a user, and there was somebody who did a quick fix about it. And there's nothing wrong. A lot of countries call it as frugal innovation. A lot of countries call it as jugaad. Every country has their own term for it. But a quick fix. So design thinking is not a very complicated chapter. Your mother has been doing it for the longest period of your time. When your siblings are there, maybe one wants non-veg for a day, the other one wants veg for a day. Aaj Mangalwar hai, so upvas hai. So no non-veg for me. So my mom would take the non-veg one, pack it in a foil, the veg one in maybe a tissue paper. Problem, user, simple solution, right? So design thinking goes back in time, even when the word design thinking was not coined. That's what Jimmy always stresses about. And that's very important for us to think that it's not a fancy exercise, it's not a fancy workshop, but it is something that you can actually implement it in your teams and by yourself, even at your home, for your smaller problems. Now, after you've done your workshop, you need to get back to earth. You need to get back to your base camp and look at, apply what you know. Then is when you start applying your converging brain. When you know your innovative ideas, when you have gone back to your base camp, is when you start applying your knowledge, when you start applying your business strategies, your business canvases, and all of that. And that is the time to execute, right? Because you have done your design thinking workshop, and if you don't execute it out into the right product, it has no meaning. It's just an activity. So for that, you probably either have to hire great designers or maybe great engineers. So you need to have an execution strategy in place. So when you are talking about an investment, there's always an exit strategy, right? So when you talk about design thinking, have an execution strategy. If you don't have that, you're just shooting arrows in the air. So, but then always retrospect and introspect. When you're doing design thinking, when you're trying to think creative, you're gonna have problems. Sometimes you'll find yourself in a deep crater, right? You don't know how to get out. You don't know what to do after that. So you need a navigator who's gonna pull you out, a jeep, a Thar, or somebody who's gonna pull you out. And that at times is an expert, is a subject matter expert or a designer who can actually pull you out of the crater. And during the way, there are a lot of terrains, right? So when you have a lot of terrains, these are just your hurdles. I'm not able to think innovative. I'm not able to push myself. I'm not able to think stupid. I'm not able to think creative. What's happening? So that is the time when senior leadership needs to push their team, really needs to push their team, because it's just a small bump. It's not a setback, or you're not going to go flat out. But then there are places where you are nowhere. That also happens. You might end up designing an entire great product, and then you don't know why isn't it not working, what's happening, and that's when you and even after the design thinking workshop, you don't know what happens, because a lot of times organizations, they set up a big room of design thinking participants, right? And they have engineers, they have HR guys, they have finance guys, everybody, because that is the design thinking 101 rule book. Get everybody from everybody, right? But then what happens after the workshop? Everybody splits back to their work and it's gone. So what needs to happen here is we go back to your execution strategy, setting up core smaller teams and focusedly work on that. With that, I leave you with the final thought. We get back on earth, and the final thought being one step to innovation with design thinking, a giant leap for your business. Thank you so much.